So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you will, the Education Financial Condition Report begins on page 11 of your agenda book. And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Fuller, to give the background on this item, please.
Good morning, everyone. The annual financial conditions report describes the conditions of Arkansas public institutions of higher education. It also describes challenges that are experienced by these institutions throughout the year. Within the report, topics that are addressed include the productivity-based funding, comparisons of faculty salaries to other SREB states, which is the Southern Region Educational Board. Okay, I know we have quite a few acronyms. We talked about that yesterday in training. It also talks about tuition and fees, fund balances for institutions, institutional scholarship expenditures, and athletic expenditures. On the next few slides, we'll go through over just a few of these items. We won't go through everything within the book. They are included in your manual there. First item we do want to talk about is a comparison of the faculty salaries to other SREB states. This first chart you will see is the comparison of the public four-year universities. This data is from 2021. We're still a year or two behind on the data from SREB. As you'll see, Arkansas is next to the bottom on four-year average salaries at $73,000. And the average for the states is $87,000. So we're about $14,000 below the average for all the SREB states. The next slide is going to be for the two-year public colleges. For the same year, you can see Arkansas is at the bottom with the average salary of $45,000. Across all states, the average is $56,000. So we're about $11,000 below the average for SREB. The next time we're going to talk about is the change in fund balances, or I'm sorry, university revenue that's available for each school. You can see across this chart, again, on the four-year institutions, Arkansas had the smallest change in revenue from 2015 to 2020, right at 5%. For the same time period on the two-year campuses, we are a little over 25%. It makes us third across the SREB. The next item we'll talk about is tuition and fee revenues. We'll say with the addition of around $35 million that's been added to the productivity funding model to distribute state funds to the colleges, we have tried as best as possible to keep tuition rates down for students to make that affordable. As you know, with inflation, the way it's gone, the costs on the campuses, it has had to have increases to most campuses. It's for the past year, or from 23 to the current year 24, four-year institutions increased their tuition on average by 3.2%. For the two-year campuses, that average increase was 6.9%. The next slide is a chart of the four-year campuses showing that 3.2% average increase. And over the past 5 years, it was a total increase of 12% from 2019 in average tuition. Next slide on the two-year campuses shows the 6.9% one-year increase. And over 5 years from 2019, average tuition has increased 17% on the two-year campuses. Next slides will show fund balances on each of the campuses for 2022-23. For industry standards across public institutions for 4 years, fund balances should be somewhere between 5% to 14% of their educational and general operating budgets. For the past fiscal year, all but two of our institutions' fund balances were above that 5%. And on the two-year campuses, there were no institutions that had less than 5%. Shows a chart of those four-year institutions. And then the 2 years. And again, all of these are in your agenda book there if you need a better picture of that. Next item, we'll talk about the institutional scholarships, the amount that the institution is able to scholarship students from their revenues. There is a maximum on this set in law. that a school cannot offer more than 20% of their educational tuition and fee revenue for scholarships. In 2023, 19,954 scholarships were awarded on the four-year campuses at a cost of $71.5 million. This was down from the prior year, which had 21,000 scholarships at $75 million. Also was a reduction in the percentage of tuition that was scholarship down to 8.9% on average compared to 9.8% in the previous year. And this slide is a little blurry, but it shows for each institution, how much percentage of their total tuition and fee revenue was scholarships. The last thing I want to talk about, there's a small slide here talking about capital funding. We have a facilities audit program that reviews buildings on the campuses and their maintenance needs. And the current maintenance need as of 2022 showed that there was over $3 billion in deferred maintenance needs on campuses, with $265 million of that classified as critical maintenance to those buildings. And this is a subject we talk about quite often, about the need for funding for maintenance on campuses when there's no dedicated stream of revenue to those maintenance needs. And we've created a fund for that now moving forward and hope to find some funding for that. But I know this is a dire need on the campuses for that deferred maintenance cost for their buildings. And then recommendations from this report, again, that we continue to work with institutions to monitor and refine the productivity funding model to make sure we're meeting the needs of the students and the campuses, and to work with you all and the legislature and the governor's office to make sure that we are aligning institutional funding with state policies. Any questions on the financial conditions report?
Mr. Fuller, I've got a question about the public two-year college salaries.
Yes, sir.
Go back to that chart if you would. I see this is for 21 up here. And as I understand it, I don't follow K through 12 closely, but starting salary in K through 12 now is $50,000.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea what that number is for this year?
I do not yet. Like I said, the SREB, where we pull the information from, is still lagging behind on the data for us to get that information.
That just looks to me like an obvious problem.
Yes, sir.
If that number is close to 45,000, we're paying our two-year college faculty 45,000, K through 12.
Yes, sir. And there's funding set aside for those K-12 for that increase, where we don't have any funding set aside for increases on the two-year
I
campus.
commend our governor for getting that number up to 50, but something needs to happen to this group too.
Yes, sir.
Observation, not pretty.
Yep. Any other questions?
Other questions, comments for Mr. Fuller? Okay, we'll move on. Information agenda item number 2. The maintenance report begins on page 2-1 of the agenda book. Mr. Fuller, for background, please.
Sir. This item is going to be a report of any bond or loan feasibilities that were issued over the past year that were approved from you all. This was set out in coordinating board policy. For any maintenance of new facilities that are issued, that a report has to be presented to you annually. This says at the October meeting, we are obviously a quarter behind on presenting that. But this ensures that all newly constructed purchased facilities have a source of funding for maintenance. When we present a bond feasibility, if there is a building being purchased with that bond or loan issue, that the school has to set aside a certain dollar amount for the maintenance of that building. The current rates for those are $2.50 per square foot for E and G facilities and $1.25 per square foot for an auxiliary facility. This report includes the status of the maintenance transfer for each facility for which those loans were issued. And the actual report should be in your agenda book if there are any questions on this.
Is that a current per gross square foot?
Yes, sir.
I mean,
Yes, we review
taken in
that.
the last year?
Yes, sir. I think the last time we reviewed that on a question, that the actual per square foot was still a little bit under that. So we review it each year to make sure we're still within the cost range.
Seems reasonable. I mean,
Yes, sir. Okay. If any of you have a question, if you'll pull the mic closer to you, apparently people on the Zoom call can't hear you. All right, any other questions on the maintenance?
Other questions, comments? Okay, let's move on. Agenda item number 3, the personal services recommendations for classified and non-classified personnel. Mr. Fuller, background, please.
This is going to be a request for changes to the line item positions that institutions have authority to fill for their campus for the fiscal year that begins in July for 2025. This is based off of recommendations that were made last year for the beginning of the biennium. And this is only for any changes from that initial recommendation from last year. Line item maximum salaries for all positions were adjusted by 7% for those maximums to account for the consumer price index. That's where the 7% comes from. And any salary recommendations for new positions are based on salaries for comparable positions at other institutions. Currently, all of the public institutions have 27,022 positions authorized, excluding UAMS. We sort them out separately with them being a medical school and having a hospital. But the institutions have requested and ADHE staff recommend an overall increase of 17 positions for the institutions, which results in a 0.1% increase to a total of 27,039 positions. UAMS did submit some changes, but their overall nets out to a 0 increase. So their request remains at 11,974 positions. And staff does recommend approval of this recommendation. Any questions on that?
Any questions or comments?
I believe that one does need an approval.
I'm sorry.
I believe that one needs an approval
Okay.
from you all.
All right, so I would entertain a motion to approve, please. I'll make a motion.
Second.
Motion and second to approve from the committee. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you. Okay, that concludes that report, Mr. Fuller. Thank you very much. I would entertain a motion to adjourn from the committee. I make a motion.
Second.
Good, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you so